Roberto wrote, this is an interesting one. We have a piano studio with 90 plus active students and a waiting list of 30. Cool. We are only two at the moment. My wife is the teacher and mastermind behind the magic in our studio, and I'm in charge of the operations. We are at the VAT threshold. So that's a European tax, the value added tax. If we bring in one more student, we would have to start paying an additional 20% in VAT. We believe it may be hard to transfer this cost to the students in one go, and we fear the negative impact on our business if we went that way. My wife is also completely booked with students, so bringing in more students is almost impossible. If we hired two more teachers, their cost plus the added VAT would require that we go from 90 to 250 students just to keep the same profit we have now. Question: how would you look at this challenge, and what would you suggest we explore? So I'm going to start here and say, first off, I really appreciate that you have done the model so that you know the number of students you need to get to. The amount of preparation, like I work with people who are considering coaching, or teachers just email me or I'll jump on a call with them, and they don't even have a basic model built out of what level they need to be at for profit, or these sorts of things. So good job for you there. That's first thing. Second, I would not. This might sound like it's coming a little bit out of left field, because the way this question is framed, it kind of implies a certain kind of answer, but I'm just going to say this straight up. It might not damage your business the way that you imagine it will for you just to raise your rates by 20%. The largest rate raise I ever did was 23% in one go. And I let people know 6 months in advance that it was coming. I didn't lose a single student from it. That might be the solution to your problem. Now, there might be, legal angle solutions to your problems. There might be other things that to take into consideration. I would say that one way that you could compensate for this would be to have higher margins. And again, group lessons are a great way to raise your margins in your studio. Again, not to belabor a point, but for studios running Piano Express from grouplessons.com, depending on the model which you choose to run it, there is sometimes a staff cost reduction of 92%, leading people to triple their margins in under a year by switching over to that system, just because the student-teacher ratio is so favorable to the owner while maintaining the high educational standards. So group lessons is a possible solution. Raising rates is a possible solution. Not having to hire additional staff but be able to take on those extra students is certainly a possible solution. Those are the things that kind of jump out at me directly. Nate, anything you want to add in there?
Yeah, I'm just gonna piggyback off what you said. I love where you went, which was a price increase right away. And I understand why everyone's hesitant about doing a 20% price increase, but I want to just present the opportunity here with that. Number one, you don't have to do a price increase in one fell swoop. You can do it over, say, the course of 2 years, knowing that you have a long-term strategic opportunity, which is to cover that VAT by increasing inventory, by bringing on a new teacher. So in the short term, maybe you do 10% one year, 10% the second year, but you know that you're going to increase your volume. I.e., like you said, you need to go from 95 to 250. That 250 is based on I'm assuming based on having the price you have now. But I love your idea, Daniel, of just going straight for a price increase. Also, yeah, your notion of like, hey, you can do more with the space you have, the teachers you have through group opportunities is a great thought. The next thing I would say is that whenever I make these forecasts, which clearly you're a numbers person because you're coming at it with a lot of thought, is I always question my assumptions. Like you make your spreadsheet and then you're like, okay, wait, do I really have to go all the way to 250? What does it look like at 150? What does it look like at 200? Am I missing some opportunities, which is specifically what Daniel's speaking to? So question your assumptions, take a look at the forecast, and make sure you look at the forecast a few times and then do what I oftentimes did, especially when I was dealing with a larger strategic growth issue, which is I brought in an outside set of eyes. So like I have a friend who worked for $1 billion hedge fund as a CFO, and I'd just be like, dude, can I buy you a beer and have you look at my spreadsheets for an hour? Go to your network right now with your assumptions and just show them, tee up your question, which is beautiful, and then say, What questions am I not asking? And do you see anything that I don't see? What's the story you see? Because that's the whole ticket with a spreadsheet. If it's doing its job, is it's just telling a clear story to anybody who looks at it, who's interested in that kind of thing, right? So that's the ticket there, Roberto, is get a couple of other friends on board who love to look at numbers like you may and say, hey, I'm actually seeing a different story, because there's always going to be another angle on this. Daniel, that's all I got on that one, though. I love it. It's a great question. I can't wait to hear what the solution is. Roberto, you got to let us know in a year or two how it goes.
Yeah. Do you have any follow-up to that, Roberto?
No, 2 comments. One, thank you so much, guys. I really love following you. We've got to this stage thanks to your podcast, Daniel, and all the comments Nate is sharing here. So it's amazing to follow you guys. And second, yes, having this model of the business model has helped us to forecast in one way, but I appreciate your point, Nate. I need to check my assumptions, but also there is a bit of a limiting belief perhaps on our side, like are we worth the money we want to charge
Yes.
to make the business continue? And the second thing that is ringing in my head is a comment from an accountant friend of ours. She asked, but are you really going to have 250 students in that little town where you live? So she's questioning the size of our market. And yeah, so up to you guys. Thank you.
Well, I love that's precisely the perspective you want. You want to get 2 or 3 of those alternate perspectives, because they're going to raise questions that you may not be raising, which is like, do you even have, back to Daniel's initial comment or Zach's around opening second locations. Yeah. Do you actually have enough leads that you can convert to that growth?
Yeah. And I'm so glad that, Roberto, you brought up the idea of it being a limiting belief. I'm just going to tell a brief story here. Earlier in this podcast, I talked about Justice Map. I actually shared that with a client because they were convinced that there weren't as many people in their new location. They'd moved 500 miles across the country. And they had a certain belief in their mind about how many people were in this location versus how many people were where they came from. And they had this thought, like, I'm just not going to be as successful here. And when we actually dug into the data, there were just as many kids in their new area and just as much population as in their old area. It just didn't seem that way. And so actually, again, digging into the numbers, I think, can be so helpful. And I just want to encourage everyone who's listening. Numbers and data and measurement and tracking can't and won't solve all your problems, but they'll solve a lot of them. This is why I kind of champion this position so much on this podcast, because yeah, Nate, is you have something to say there?
No, I think they get you to raise better questions. You know what I mean? Like I mean, I've said this before, but I'm too much of a numbers wonk. So there's too many spreadsheets like that I could pull up right now, Roberto, around your forecasting. And so it took a friend to be like, dude, you don't need to keep looking at that, but you do need to consistently look at it. And so consistently looking at the measurements, as Daniel puts it, helps me when I'm asked different questions. And I by different, I mean hopefully better ones, because that's all we're actually doing as owners and founders to try to develop this entity, is we're just regularly looking at what's happening under the roof of our school and saying, what could be different? And sometimes we're looking at the people, and sometimes we're looking at the measurements, like Daniel says. And both of those stories, it's really important to have the people and the anecdotes and the stories, but it's also really important, as Daniel said, to have the data. I would say, Daniel, would you agree that a lot of people come with stories to us, not enough people come with data to us?